What if I told you there's a workplace in America where you could get a taxpayer-funded, world-class education in any industry you wanted on a stipend of $174,000 a year? What if I then told you you could freely use that education to invest as you saw fit? That workplace exists, and it's the United States Congress. And nobody does it quite like Senator Markwayne Mullin of Oklahoma. Since taking office, Mullin made over 500 stock transactions worth a combined $24 million in buys and sells across 106 different companies. Those trades included defense contractors, health insurers, and government education vendors, while he sat on the Armed Services Committee, which decides what the DoD is allowed to spend money on, the HELP Committee, which regulates how the health and education industry operates, and the HHS Subcommittee, that decides whether those health and education contracts get funded at all. Not only that, but he also filed over 70 of those trades more than 2 years late in explicit violation of the Stock Act. Now, I don't believe Markwayne Mullin showed up in Washington corrupt on his first day. His net worth went from around $5 million when he entered Congress to over $65 million today, but most of that came from selling his plumbing company, which I have not investigated. The stock trades didn't make him rich, but they do show what happens when you give a smart, aggressive businessman access to the inner workings of every industry his committees touch. Some of these trades look like a senator using knowledge gained on the job. Some of them look a lot worse. It doesn't start with stock trades. It starts with a scrappy American looking to make it big. Mullin took over his father's plumbing company at age 20 when it was $500,000 in debt with 6 employees. He built it into the largest service company in the region with over 150 workers, expanded into environmental services, real estate, restaurants, and eventually agriculture with a 1,600-acre cattle ranch by the end of it. When he ran for Congress in 2012, he branded himself as the outsider, before it was cool, and promised to serve only 3 terms, going so far as to sign a formal term limits pledge to tell voters he was serious about term limits. At least at first. By 2017, Mullin announced a 4th term run, saying he was ill-advised and didn't understand politics when he made the promise. Former Senator Tom Coburn, a fellow Oklahoma Republican, said, "The arrogance of power has affected his thinking, and when a man's word doesn't mean anything, nothing else matters." 5 House terms became a Senate seat, and the Senate seat is becoming a cabinet post. So much for the citizen legislator. In 2021, while serving in the House, he sold Mullin Plumbing to a Dallas private equity firm for what disclosures suggest was tens of millions. His reported assets jumped from roughly $31 million to over $75 million. And while his wealth was exploding, his businesses received somewhere between $800,000 and $1.9 million in PPP loans during COVID. But to be fair, millions of businesses did. The program was designed to keep employees on payroll during shutdowns. The thing is, Mullin voted yes to the CARES Act that created those loans in the first place. Then, his businesses collected anywhere up to $1.9 million that was later forgiven. And after all that, he turned right back around and opposed student loan forgiveness, saying it was unfair to taxpayers that didn't go to school. But isn't PPP loan forgiveness unfair to taxpayers that don't own businesses? If that's not hypocrisy, I'm not sure what is. He went on Fox Business and questioned how Nancy Pelosi accumulated tens of millions during her time in Congress. He's not wrong about Pelosi. He just decided that if you can't beat him, join him. In all fairness, Mullin isn't a cartoon villain. In August 2021, during the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan, he called the U.S. ambassador to Tajikistan for help transporting cash into the country to hire a helicopter that would fly him into Taliban territory to rescue an American woman named Mariam and her 3 children, stranded after the fall of Kabul. The Pentagon denied him permission and the State Department told him not to go. Both Pelosi and McCarthy urged all Americans to stay away. He went anyway. He coordinated their escape, and a week later, the family made it out. Whether you think it was brave or reckless, nobody can say the man lacked conviction. But power corrupts even the best of us without real checks and balances, and the longer Mullin stayed in Washington, the more he learned just how far those checks have eroded. The law that's supposed to prevent congressional insider trading, the Stock Act, didn't actually change anything. What it did do was explicitly clarify that existing insider trading laws also apply to Congress. Most Americans already interpreted insider trading as doing just that. It was passed back in 2012 to calm America's outrage at congressional stock trading. The Stock Act covers two distinct topics. The first is late filing. Members of Congress are required to disclose stock trades within 45 days. If they file late, the penalty is a measly $200, and even that can be waived by the Ethics Committee upon request. Filing late is sloppy, and Mullin has done it egregiously, but that's just the administrative side. The real issue is the second thing, insider trading. The Stock Act says that trading on material, non-public information gained through official congressional duties is illegal. Civil penalties can run up to $50,000 and criminal prosecution. On paper, that's a serious law. In practice, after 14 years, there have been a total of 0 prosecutions. Not one. Despite years of credible allegations across both parties, the Department of Justice investigated multiple senators after the COVID trades in 2020 and ultimately dropped every case. The criminal provision exists on paper but has never been used. So, the law that's supposed to stop congressional insider trading has a late filing penalty of $200 that gets waived, and a criminal provision that's never been enforced. Nobody's watching them. Nobody's enforcing it. The press used to do this job until every mainstream news channel became partisan echo chambers. Voters used to do this job too. Now we hardly hear of it. We hardly understand it, and when it does happen, we don't know what to do about it. When you hand a man with the kind of boldness we just described the keys to a system where he can trade stocks in the very companies his committees fund and regulate with 0 consequences, don't be surprised when he starts doing exactly that. I have to ask, have Oklahomans been paying attention to who they've been voting for? Mullin has been bold his entire life. You don't save a company $500,000 in debt at age 20 without it, and you don't fly to Central Asia against Pentagon orders to rescue a family from the Taliban without it. That boldness is real. At a November 2023 Senate hearing, he challenged the Teamsters president Sean O'Brien to a fistfight during live testimony.
Quit the tough guy act in these Senate hearings. You know where to find me, any place, anytime, cowboy. Sir, this is a time, this is a place. If you want to run your mouth, we can be 2 consenting adults. We can finish it here.
Okay, that's fine. Perfect.
You want to do it now?
I'd love to do it right now.
Well, stand your butt up then.
You stand your butt up.
Oh, hold on.
Big
Oh,
guy.
oh, stop it.
Is that your solution, everybody?
No, sit down. Sit down. Okay. You know, you're a United States Senator. Sit down.
Active.
Oh, okay.
Sit down, please.
That's who Markwayne Mullin is. Now let's take a closer look at what exactly he's been doing with the congressional knowledge from his committee seats. All of Mullin's stock trades are filed with the Senate's electronic financial disclosure system. Every trade I'm about to show you is documented there, and I encourage you to see for yourself. When we talk about congressional trading, the conversation focuses on whether or not they traded on some singular piece of privileged information. But that's not the only way the information advantage works. A senator's committee seats inherently give him a deep understanding of how industries actually work, even if he isn't the final deciding factor. Committee members attend hearings, read briefings, question executives under oath, see budget numbers before they're public, and most importantly, create lasting political relationships. That itself isn't bad. In fact, it's the job. We want senators to understand defense procurement, healthcare policy, and education funding. That's the whole point of putting them on committees. The problem is that they trade on that information. Plenty of people develop expertise on the taxpayer's dime. Federal regulators, military officers, intelligence analysts, government contractors, every one of them faces trading restrictions that are actually enforced. At a bank, you'd have compliance restrictions. At a consulting firm, you'd be fired. At a law firm, you'd be disbarred. Congress passed the Stock Act to give itself the same treatment, but as we just covered, it has never been enforced once in 14 years. Some of these trades look like a senator simply using expertise he gained on the job. Some of them have timing that's hard to explain as coincidence. And one of them looks like a textbook case study in exactly the kind of conduct the Stock Act was supposed to prevent. Mullin sits on the Senate Armed Services Committee, specifically the Air-Land Subcommittee, which oversees Army and Air Force procurement, Sea Power, which oversees naval procurements, and Emerging Threats and Capabilities, the subcommittee that receives briefings on where conflicts are developing before they become public. On December 29, 2025, Mullin bought into Raytheon, Chevron, and ConocoPhillips. Days later, the U.S. launched military action against Venezuela and then Iran. Defense and oil stocks surged. As of early March, ConocoPhillips was up 34%, Chevron was up 34%, and Raytheon was up 14% since his purchase date. At the top of his disclosed range, that's over $40,000 in gains. That's roughly a fifth of his congressional salary, and for some people, it's the entirety of their salary. Did he know about the strikes in advance? I don't know. But I can tell you that members of the Armed Services Committee receive classified briefings on exactly these kinds of operations, and that buying defense and oil stocks days before military strikes is suspicious, to say the least. At best, he's trading on expertise gained through his time in Congress. At worst, he's trading on advanced knowledge of military operations. Either way, it shouldn't be legal. How is the public supposed to discern whether these trades used non-public knowledge or not? Our elected officials are expected to hold themselves to a higher standard than the average citizen. Mullin also sits on both the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, called HELP, and the Labor, Health, and Human Services Appropriations Subcommittee, called LHHS. The HELP Committee directly oversees federal health policy and regulates major insurers. The LHHS Subcommittee oversees HHS, which administers Medicare and Medicaid. He doesn't just regulate health insurers, he funds the programs they depend on. On September 24, 2025, while holding both of those seats, Mullin bought stock in United Health Group, the largest health insurer in the country and the same company whose CEO was shot by Luigi Mangione. The stock had already fallen over 40% from its highs. He bought the dip. And when it kept falling, he went back for more on February 25, 2026. Adding another $50,000 to $100,000. That's the kind of conviction that comes from understanding an industry at a level the public doesn't have access to. If you think that's bad, you better take a seat for this one. Mullin's trades of Stride Inc. seem to cross the line from structural advantage to something that looks a lot like what the Stock Act was written to prevent. It's not one or two directional trades. It's a pattern of short-term trading the company 7 times over a period just under 2 years. A pattern of buying, selling, buying back within days, and repeating the cycle. And you guessed it, Stride is connected to a committee seat that gave Mullin direct, non-public visibility into the forces driving its stock price. Stride Inc., formerly K-12 Inc., is a for-profit education company that powers online virtual charter schools across the country. You've probably never heard of it, but it's a $2.3 billion company with over 80% of that revenue coming from taxpayer-funded per-pupil education dollars. When a student enrolls in a Stride-powered virtual school, the state pays Stride the same per-pupil amount it would have paid a traditional public school. Sounds like a great model supporting school choice, and Mullin's committee seats gave him a front-row view of every policy lever that makes or breaks it. Here's every Stride trade Mullin made in order. On July 30th, 2024, Mullin purchased Stride in 2 lots totaling roughly $2,000 to $30,000. At the time, he sat on the HELP Committee, which has direct jurisdiction over K-12 education policy, charter school rules, per-pupil funding formulas, and virtual school recognition. The HELP Committee doesn't write checks directly to Stride. It does something more valuable. It decides exactly how companies like Stride are allowed to operate or even exist. Between 2020 and 2024, Congress allocated approximately $190 billion in elementary and secondary school emergency relief, or ESSER funding, for public schools. Once ESSER expired, public schools would be set to lose 5 to 8% of their budgets overnight. Districts would face layoffs, program cuts, and possibly even school closures. Virtual schools like Stride would be the alternative. The ESSER cliff was the best thing that could happen to Stride's enrollment numbers, and the surge was set to hit on September 30, 2024. Now, any investor could look at the ESSER expiration and reason that virtual schools might benefit. But there's a difference between guessing and knowing. Mullin's committee was hearing behind closed doors how severe the impact would be district by district, that no extension was coming, and how enrollment was already shifting toward virtual alternatives. The Help Committee wasn't guessing about the aftermath. They were watching it develop in real time. Mullin bought in July while his committee had full visibility into how that $190 billion was winding down and knew exactly how the aftermath should have looked for the education industry. Oh, and the filing dates? He didn't disclose the July 2024 trades until November and December. That's more than 3 months late. Stock Act? Oh, you mean this old thing? On December 18, 2024, Mullin sold his entire Stride position for a 60% gain. He bought in around $65 a share and sold around $105. But wait, 15 days later, on January 2nd, 2025, he bought right back in via 2 separate lots totaling somewhere between $30,000 to $100,000. Why take profits just to re-enter right around the same price? And this time 3 times bigger than before. What changed between the sell and the buy is that Mullin joined the Appropriations LHHS subcommittee I mentioned earlier. So now he sits on both the committee that authorizes education policy and the committee that funds it. He cashed out his smaller position and immediately rebuilt a much larger one timed perfectly to his expanded authority over the entire sector. On February 3, 2025, he bought another $1,000 to $15,000, doubling down on his thesis. From September to October 2025, the hammer dropped. On September 14, 2025, a New Mexico school district filed a fraud complaint with the SEC, alleging that Stride inflated enrollment numbers with ghost students, fake enrollments used to collect taxpayer per pupil funding. Stride's stock crashed over 50% the following week. Even worse, it wasn't even the first time. As California Attorney General, Kamala Harris won a $169 million settlement against the same company in 2016 for the exact same fraud. On October 28, 2025, Stride announced its fiscal Q1 2026 results and revealed that a botched platform upgrade drove away between 10,000 and 15,000 students. Multiple law firms filed securities fraud class action lawsuits, alleging management misled investors about the ghost students and the platform problems. The period of that suit ran from October 2024 through October 2025. Mullin chose to hold through all of it. Ghost students, securities fraud lawsuits, and a 50% crash. What the heck was this guy thinking? On December 18, 2025, he sold out, and it seemed like he finally decided the ride was over after the crash. But 18 days later, on January 5, 2026, he bought right back in via 2 lots totaling somewhere between $30,000 and $100,000, triggering a wash sale that would disqualify any tax deduction on the previous loss. This time, he's buying into a company under active securities fraud investigation by multiple law firms, a platform meltdown, and a 50% crash. Something made him decide Stride was in it for the long haul anyway. On February 4, 2026, he added more, another $15,000 to $50,000. This is the same day he bought Adobe, the same filing that disclosed the defense stocks. Stride's Q2 results came in January 27 and showed signs of recovery. Margins rise, growth builds. He's buying the recovery on a company his appropriations subcommittee helps fund, while that company is being sued for fraud. Let me be clear about what this pattern looks like. A senator sits on the committee that decides whether virtual schools like Stride are allowed to exist and grow. He buys the stock 2 months before a funding cliff that his committee has full visibility into, a cliff that would drive enrollment to companies like Stride. He files late, hiding the trades for months. He sells at year-end, buys back within 15 days in a wash sale, and uses the timing of his new appropriation seat, which now funds the program Stride depends on, to double down. This one doesn't look like a mere taxpayer-funded business education. That's a senator using non-public knowledge of federal education policy to trade a company his committees control, repeatedly, aggressively, through losses, through fraud, and in violation of disclosure rules. This is exactly what the Stock Act was written to stop, and nobody has done anything about it. The irony is that the Esser thesis was working for him. The stock doubled before the fraud allegations hit. Goes to show that even when you trade on what you know, a black swan can still take you out. But the fact that he kept buying after the crash tells you his conviction wasn't coming from the company's fundamentals, momentum, or narrative. It was coming from his committees. Mullin has been nominated to lead the Department of Homeland Security. If confirmed, he will directly oversee ICE, Customs and Border Protection, the Coast Guard, and FEMA. Right now, as of this video, he holds stock in L3 Harris Technologies. L3 has at least $71 million in active DHS contracts according to usaspending.gov. No divestiture has been announced. Now, L3 Harris is a $22 billion revenue company. DHS contracts are a fraction of their business. People will argue that his decisions as secretary wouldn't meaningfully move L3 Harris's stock price, but that misses the point entirely. The point is that they would move at all. Every contract renewal, every vendor selection, every procurement decision he signs off on would affect the financial performance of a company he holds stock in. It doesn't matter whether the effect is large or small. A cabinet secretary should not have a financial interest in the outcome of his own agency's spending decisions, period. Mullin's purchase of Adobe is what originally led me down the rabbit hole to everything else that we've just talked about. Adobe's government revenue, even the full $795 million DoD enterprise license contract through Dell and DSA, represents less than 1% of their $21.5 billion in annual revenue. The point is that we are allowing our elected officials to hold very clear conflicts of interest while they make what are supposed to be the optimal decisions for this country. Mullin attended the confirmation hearing for the DoD Chief Information Officer in September 2025. That hearing laid out the entire digital transformation roadmap for the Department of Defense, and Adobe is embedded in that roadmap across 2.9 million personnel. He sits on appropriations where he sees line item budget details before the public does. He voted yea on the Consolidated Appropriations Act on January 30, 2026. The bill that funds DSA and administers Adobe's contract, and GSA, which just signed a government-wide Adobe deal. He bought Adobe on February 4th. The average retail investor looks at Adobe and sees Photoshop company getting killed by AI. Mullin sits in hearings and sees that Adobe is the backbone of document workflow for the entire DoD, that the military just committed $795 million to keep it that way, and that the federal government's entire paperless modernization strategy runs through Adobe products. He understands how deeply embedded and irreplaceable Adobe actually is. In ways, the market, which is pricing in an AI apocalypse, completely misunderstands. He didn't trade on a tip. He didn't need to. His job gave him the understanding, and there's nothing wrong with that. We want senators to understand these industries, but there is something wrong with letting him trade individual stocks in a company his committees touch. You and I had to piece together Adobe's government footprint over hours of usaspending.gov searches, SEC filings, and procurement database lookups. Mullin just had to show up to work. The understanding is the job. The trading is the abuse of the job. I want to step back for a second, because if all you take from this video is Markwayne Mullin is corrupt, you've missed the point. The founders designed this system with an assumption. They assumed that the people we send to Washington would be independently successful, wealthy enough that they didn't need to profit from the office. Washington refused his salary. Jefferson died nearly broke from public service. The model was simple. Send your best citizens. Let them serve. Send them home. That was the deal. Markwayne Mullin was that guy. He built a plumbing empire from nothing, took over his dad's company at 20 with 6 employees and $500,000 in debt, turned it into a regional powerhouse, ran for Congress as an outsider, signed a term limits pledge, and he meant it. He was the model, a self-made citizen legislator who didn't need Washington to get rich. If you went back to 2012 and asked the founders to design a candidate, they'd hand you Mullin. So what happened? He did his job. He sat on committees. He learned how defense procurement works, how healthcare spending flows, how education funding operates, how government IT contracts get awarded. That's what we elected him to do. That's why we pay him. But then he started trading on it. The system didn't fail on the front end. We elected exactly the kind of person we were supposed to elect. The system fails on the back end, when we see it and do nothing about it. That's the thing Alexis de Tocqueville warned about nearly 200 years ago. He said the greatest threat to American democracy isn't tyranny from above. It's a slow, comfortable apathy from below. Citizens who stop paying attention, who assume someone else is watching, who see the evidence and shrug because they're all like that. His confirmation hearing is March 18th. You're informed now. The question is, what do you do with it? If you want this to change, vote for congressmen and senators that explicitly support banning elected officials from trading individual stocks. 86% of Americans already agree on this, and yet nothing changes because agreement without action is just a poll number. Show up to primaries. That's where the real decisions happen. Actually research their financial disclosures. The information is all public. Every trade in this video is filed at efdsearch.senate.gov. Sites like Quiver Quantitative and Capital Trades make it even easier. The solutions aren't complicated. First, members of Congress can invest in total market index funds and nothing else. You want to participate in the growth of the American economy? Buy the whole thing. You don't get to pick winners when your committee decides who wins. Second, only elected officials with a net worth below $4 million receive a congressional salary. If you're worth $65 million, you don't need $174,000 from the taxpayer. Serve because you mean it. Before anyone in the comments decides this is a partisan hit, I voted Libertarian the last 2 presidential elections. I named the Clintons and Pelosi in this video for a reason. This isn't left or right. This is about whether we still have the civic muscle to hold power accountable, regardless of which jersey it wears. Don't just watch this video and move on. Do something with it.